good evening, and good afternoon. I hope you guys have been enjoying Star Wars Week. I know I have, and it's amazing what the Star Wars fandom can do when we're all brought together to celebrate the ultimate universe, the Star Wars universe. Because we all know for a fact that Star Wars is better than Star Trek. But anyway, I'm really enjoying Star Wars Week. I've seen a few Reddit pages dedicated to making Starbucks Star Wars drinks, so I am definitely going to, if not today, definitely tomorrow on May the 4th, going to Starbucks and creating some of those Star Wars themed drinks that aren't officially on the menu, but with a few tweaks you could definitely get them on there. So for today's episode, since it is Star Wars Week, as previously said, I wanted today's episode to be Star Wars themed, and what better way to do that than to talk about The Bad Batch. So for those of you who need a quick reminder, The Bad Batch is a sequel show to the Clone Wars animated series, and Task Force 99 was first introduced during Season 7 of the Clone Wars animated series. And the clones on this task force were clones who had mutations that were particularly useful. First up, you had Hunter, who was not only the leader of the task force, but was someone who had excellent tracking skills and could perceive electromagnetic frequencies. This meant that anyone rarely got the drop on him, and while maps could be wrong, he wasn't. Next, of course, you had Wrecker, whose mutation granted him superhuman strength and dexterity. Next, you had Tech, whose enhanced mental capacity basically gave him a very high intelligence. So if you had a question and needed someone to ask, he was your man. Next, you had Crosshair, whose mutation gave him keen eyesight and made his marksmanship absolutely incredible. If you needed someone sniped, this man was your man to do it. And later, you had Echo, a regular clone who was enhanced by the Separatists with cybernetics to join the crew. And of course, lastly, you have Omega, who was not only a female clone, but very similar to Boba Fett in which she was not modified. Although, if you wanted to know the difference between Omega and Boba, she's the only one of the two that was enhanced with a high M count rating, which meant she was attuned to the Force, similar to the Jedi and other Force users. Although we learned later that she could not use the Force, we all saw that she was, although, Force sensitive. Now, throughout the show, through its 3 seasons, it basically told the aftermath of the fall of the Republic, as the show takes place immediately after Order 66, in which the clones basically attack and kill the Jedi because of the chips in their head. Because of the clones' mutations on Task Force 99, they were immune from the chips programming in their heads. Now, of course, later we learned that it wasn't 100% because Wrecker ended up getting tuned to his chip and was trying to kill Task Force 99 until they got the chips out of his head. Also throughout the show, we also see the fall of the clones because Palpatine did not want to continue using clones since there was a huge potential risk of someone basically pulling the same stunt he did with the Jedi, but against him. Which is kind of ironic because in Legends, they actually had another order programmed to the clones, which instead of turning on the Jedi, they would turn on the Emperor himself. But of course, that's in Legends and probably is non-canon to the Star Wars we know today. So by the end of Season 1, we see the clone facility basically destroyed with a lot of the oh my god, how do you pronounce their name? Kaminoans? I'm just going to go with Camoans. Which basically we saw the Camoans get killed because, of course, Palpatine doesn't want any of their research to get out. They don't want people to learn cloning techniques or anything like that. And he has the head researcher, Nala Se, taken to work on Project Necromancer, which you can probably guess was the project to clone the Emperor just in case he ever dies. Now, the one thing that is very interesting is that by the end of Season 3, in the series finale, after Clone Force 99 rescues Omega, destroys the research that Nala Se had made, and kill Hemlock, Tarkin appears later in the episode, looks at the aftermath of everything that's been done, and talks about how they're basically going to shut down Project Necromancer and move the resources from that project to Project Stardust, which of course was the name of the project for the Death Star. This brings up an interesting question of how the Emperor ended up cloning himself, because as we saw in Rise of Skywalker, that's what he did. He cloned himself and made another type of clone project, which ended up being Snoke. And as we saw in the majority of Season 3, Cloning somebody with a high M count is extremely difficult. Even Nala Se had a hard time doing it, even though she wasn't actually trying. Because remember, you need other specimens, special specimens, to even attempt to do this, which of course included the other kids in the facility besides Omega. So I'm really hoping that this is explained in a future series, because we all know as of right now, Dave Filoni is basically playing cleanup with Star Wars, trying to explain the fall of the rebellion and the rise of the First Order, which I really do not envy him for having to play cleanup, especially since the sequel trilogies are such a mess and it's going to take a lot of time to explain everything. I mean, we all remember the excellent explanation The Rise of Skywalker gave us when it came to the Emperor. Somehow he came back. I mean, such Shakespearean writing right there. Like I said, I really don't envy him for having to explain all this. Although I will say this, he's probably having a fun time making all this lore happen. Because, I mean, the dude's a very creative guy. So he's probably enjoying having to come up with these awesome ideas. But going back to the Bad Batch, one of the things I really loved about the show was that it brought back some characters from the Clone Wars series and kind of showed us their fate, or they just brought them back because they were super fan favorites. One of them such being Gungi. I really hope I'm pronouncing that right. It's either Gungi or Gungi, who was the Wookiee Padawan, and basically showed us that he survived Order 66 and ended up back with his tribe. Although I really hope the other Padawans he was with survived as well. I'm hoping that girl went to Hondo Onaka, and basically lived her life as a pirate. That's what I'm hoping with, but yeah, Order 66 probably killed them all, except of course Gungi. We also had Cad Bane, who of course was my favorite. Loved seeing him in the show, and made me think if him being in the Bad Batch took place right after his fight with Boba, in which he thought that he killed Cad Bane. Next, we had Rex and Cody. And this was very important because, one, we kind of learned what happened with Rex, of course, in the show Rebels. But Cody is another story. We don't know what happened to him after Order 66. The last time we technically saw him was in Star Wars 3, Revenge of the Sith, after he attacks Obi-Wan. After that, we really don't have any clue on what happened to him. Even in Legends, there's not really much about Cody. So to see him basically escape and join Rex with this clone rebellion was really nice. Now all we need is kind of closure to find out what actually happens to Cody. And finally, one person that I was super surprised to see and really happy to see was Asajj Ventress. And for those of you wondering why I was super happy to see her, it's because originally she was dead. For those of you who don't know, back in like 2015 and 16, a book called The Dark Disciple came out in which Ventress died in Obi-Wan's arms because of tanking Count Dooku's lightning trying to save Jedi Master Voss. For those of you who don't know who Jedi Master Voss is, he's kind of like the jungle dude who Obi-Wan teamed up with to try to track down Cad Bane. But yeah, it was an entire thing, plus an entire love story between Ventress and Voss as well. I'm not really going to get into it because, I mean, as of right now, it's non-canon. Because, like I said, in the book, she died. There was no coming back for that. So for her to show up in the Bad Batch after Order 66, it means that that book is no longer canon. Which, I mean, I get some people will be mad about that, but I'm not, because one, nobody really reads the books. And when I mean no one really, I mean the majority of the fan base. Unless it's like a comic book, people don't really pay attention to that. They usually pay attention to the TV shows and the movies and all that stuff. So for Filoni to change her fate, it's not really a negative thing. And of course, I know that Filoni gets a lot of flack for pulling this stunt over and over again because he'll change someone's fate in Star Wars because in the book, they either died or they went a different route. But in the show, he changes it so that he's able to use that character. And again, I say let him do it. He's the dude who's been making up for all the terrible stuff in Star Wars, making excellent shows, and now he's going to be doing a movie. So if he wants to use a character that originally died in a book, let him. Because he's definitely going to do more justice to that character than anyone else can. Because again, nobody's really read the book, so nobody really would have noticed that Ventress came back. Except maybe a few fans. And who knows, maybe we'll get a future series where Ventress comes back, or she'll pop up in the Mandalorian movie or someplace else. That's the good thing about characters that we know are alive but don't know where their story goes. They can pop up and be super amazing. Heck, maybe we learn that Ventress took up a Padawan and basically trained them in the art of not really a Jedi, more like a gray Jedi. That would actually be really cool if she ended up being a gray Jedi. It would make perfect sense for Ventress. Because remember, she was originally trained as a Jedi Padawan, and then of course later as a Sith, so she understands both sides of the Force spectrum. But whether or not she goes that route is up in the air. But again, I'm just happy to see her alive. Now let's talk about the series finale, or the ending of the Bad Batch, because it was definitely not what I was expecting at all. And I say this because of how season 2 ended with Tech's death. Because of that, I expected the series finale to have a lot more deaths, especially when it came to the squad going to rescue Omega. Once they got captured by Hemlock's Project clones, I was expecting Wrecker to die, or even Echo. Because one, Wrecker was already injured after he tried to wrestle the animal while trying to break into the facility, and Echo was basically outnumbered and pinned by the enemy clones. So I was expecting either one of them to either sacrifice themselves to take out the clones, or sacrifice themselves to save each other and kill the rest of the clones. But for them to both come out on top, definitely something I wasn't expecting. And one of the best parts about the finale was Crosshair shooting a Hemlock with his other hand and freeing Omega. I mean, him losing his hand was pretty good. I was not expecting him to lose that. Not to mention, I kind of expected a lot more blood from that, but I guess since it's technically still a kid's show, they can't really show that much blood or blood at all. So I'll give them credit when credit's due for that. But again, him being able to shoot with his other hand to free Omega, amazing. Now, one thing I really loved about the finale was that Nala Se got to kill Rampart. I mean, it was especially fitting since this was the man responsible for the destruction of Kamino and the clone facilities. So for her to kill Rampart and her research, just absolutely beautiful. Another thing that was fantastic was seeing the Zillo Beast again. I wasn't expecting that creature to be a Zillo Beast, so when it was revealed that it was that, I was like, finally, we get to learn where the heck this guy was, and the fact that he kind of gave the middle finger to the Empire, who kept him trapped and cloned him, and he was able to go out in the wild. So that was pretty good. Omega using him as a distraction, just top tier. Now, the one thing that really surprised me about the finale is at the end, they all went back to Pabu, which was weird because the Empire had found them on that planet before. So the fact that they were able to end up living there peacefully for years was surprising. And another thing about the finale was how cool it was to see an older Hunter and an adult Omega who was going off to join the rebellion to be a pilot. And from the way she looked, I want to say that she was probably in her 20s, most likely her late 20s. So when it comes to the timeline, it's probably safe to say that this took place right before the Battle of Yavin. Because remember, okay, I'm probably going to get this wrong with the dates. The Bad Batch takes place around 19 BBY, and that's before Battle of Yavin. So, like I said, I want to say she's in her late 20s, and since she was around 11 or 12 during the Bad Batch, that's about 16 years. So I want to say it's around there. I could be wrong. There's not really an official timeline when it comes to that, but I'm pretty confident that's when it takes place. So she was definitely part of the rebellion, and I'm honestly kind of surprised that they haven't done like a story link between her and Rex, since Rex joined the rebellion right before the Battle of Yavin as well. Again, she wasn't even a figure in Dave Filoni's imagination when they were making Rebels, so it makes sense that she didn't show up there, but I wouldn't be surprised if he does another TV show in which they see each other again and recognize each other. But the one disappointing thing about the show, especially towards the end, was the fact that we didn't get to expand on Omega's Force sensitivity. Since of course we saw that she couldn't really harness the Force to use it, but she could sense it. I mean, throughout the series, we kind of see her bond with animals, be more sensitive, especially when she was with Gunji and the tribe, how she was meditating. You could see that she was definitely Force sensitive, and I wish they would have expanded on that more, but I guess leaving it open-ended kind of says like, hey, we could definitely explore this later on. But Omega's Force sensitivity isn't the only thing I wish they would have expanded upon, because the ending of the show still had a huge lingering question, and that's how the clones lost in the rebellion against the Empire. Because if you look at the show Rebels, we see an older Rex with Gregor and Wolf on the planet Selos. We know that the clones, during the Bad Batch, were organizing to not only free their brothers, but also try to fight against the Empire. Which begs the question, what happened to Cody, Echo, and the other clones that were with Rex during this time? Especially since they were working with Senator Ryo Kuchi and Avi Sign. I'm probably butchering their names, and I apologize for that. But it still has the question, what happened to all that? I really hope that Filoni answers these questions, maybe with a series or a movie talking about the Clone Rebellion, because these are a lot of questions that need answers to. I mean, if you look at Battlefront 2, we know all about the Clone Rebellion. And when I mean Battlefront 2, I meant the original. We learned that the Clone Rebellion is taking place back on Kamino, but since that's not the case here, where the heck does it take place? How did Rex, Gregor, and Wolf end up on Selos, basically just on their retirement because there was nothing else they could do against the Empire? I mean, like I said, it's still a big question. Heck, I want to know what happened to Echo. Because again, none of these names come up in Rebels. The only clones we know about is Rex, Gregor, and Wolf. So I really hope, again, that Filoni ties up all these loose ends with either a movie or a show about the failed Clone Rebellion. I'm really hoping it's a movie because it'd be really good and he can make it as dark as he wants to be. Like if he makes a movie about the failed Clone Rebellion, it needs to be dark. Because the Clone Rebellion isn't like everyone makes it out alive or all super happy type ending. It ended with a lot of deaths in Legends, a lot of dead clones, a lot of people basically being killed just because they decided to fight against the Empire. So again, if he does decide to do anything, he needs to make it as dark as possible. Heck, maybe Darth Vader can appear, or maybe the other Inquisitors. Do something with it, man. I mean, we're all behind you, and I get that we're probably not going to get anything until the Mandalorian movie is over, but after the Mandalorian movie, I really hope we get something on the Clone Rebellion. And hopefully not another book, because we all know Filoni is basically going to rewrite that anyway. But anyway, besides all that, I really liked the Bad Batch, and I was really happy with everyone getting a happy ending, because in reality, when it comes to Star Wars, especially when it comes to anything with the clones, it's usually depressing, which is what I was expecting when it came to the end of the Bad Batch. So for Hunter, Wrecker, and Crosshair to get their happily ever after, retire peacefully, I'm really happy with that, and I really hope to see Omega in future content as well. Heck, maybe she'll be able to run into Boba Fett, which is basically Alpha. Oh yeah, that's another thing. I really hope that Omega would have ran into Boba in this series, because it was already revealed that he was Alpha to her Omega. So that would actually be really funny to see that happen and see if he even knew about Omega too. But until we get answers, the only thing we can do is ponder and hope to get a new series. Anyway, that's it for this week's episode. I hope you guys enjoyed the Star Wars themed. I hope you enjoyed your Star Wars week. And I'll see you next week, where I am actually going to be doing another interview, this time with the creator or co-creator of Mautopia. So if you're a fan of Mautopia, it's definitely something to look forward to. So until then, sayonara, see you later, and have a good one. Goodbye.